Hello, this is Greg Mannion doing the Infinite Breath Addiction Stories podcast. And today is an old mate of mine. We met in Barcelona, Spain, but Mark's from England like me. And he's going to talk about his story about addiction, whatever that is for him. He's going to explain it in a second. But I want to just tell people, so we met. Now it must be 4 years ago. We met
I went in 2016. I first moved to Spain. I think in Barcelona. I came because I was I actually sat in on the acting class you were in before I moved there. So I was looking for an area. So I actually met you then, and then I think maybe a few months after then I joined the class. But because you were from Liverpool, and because it was a class that had people from all over Europe, I'd sort of spoke to you about what it was like living in Barcelona and that sort of thing. So I actually met you for the very first sort of day of being in Spain before I'd even moved. But then we then met, I think it was 2016, I moved the first time to Barcelona. And then I went back to England and then came back again. So I was in Spain for about 4 or 5 months, then went back to England and then came back again the next year and then lived there for a year. So 2016, 2017 maybe. But then I think when I left,
17 we were doing.
2017. Then when I left, that was when we then met last year, because I was thinking it must have been once I left Barcelona. We kept in contact, but to actually see you in person, I think was maybe another 2 years after that.
Yeah, so we've been in acting class together. We actually did a play together, which didn't quite turn out because the teacher was nuts to say the least.
Problems.
But yeah, and every play started, but we were playing brothers, man. I was the older brother, you were the younger brother. And the funny thing about it was, and Frank used to say this to me, he was like, I see it in you, Greg. There's like something in you, something kind of nasty and kind of you're hiding. That was it, you're hiding. And I was like, okay, I could accept it, but I wasn't quite sure. But he was kind of right, because I wouldn't always give so much. And then he put me together with you, where it's funny thing with the play, you started out as the drunk younger brother. I was the mature older brother who was looking after you. But this play, by the end of it, it turned out that I was the real bastard that had done terrible things, and you were the one getting it together. And it was interesting, man. It was really, I mean, the rehearsals were good. And he, like mad as he was a really good teacher. And I used quite a bit of his stuff in teaching coaches, because he would definitely get the best out of us, and that really relates to all these things and talking about emotions and getting you to push yourself. I use it quite often with other people and myself. So I'm like, come on, what is it? Where are we going? How do we get there? You got to be that little bit cutting. So he was good, man. I still use that type of stuff a lot.
I used to feel though that class, because you used to sort of, it felt a bit like a group sharing session, because you used to sort of be on stage on your own. So if you were, say, rehearsing something as the character, you were then sort of still thinking of the emotion, what was driven behind everything. So it did feel like a way that you were sharing and expressing, because you were looking at how your life related to the character. And especially with that play that we were doing, that was when I stopped drinking, whilst at the time playing a character who was going through a similar thing. So it's a really sort of strange moment for me that we were rehearsing this play, playing this character, whilst I also had my own issues going on as well as that. So I don't know, just a really strange, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But it was mainly due to the teacher rather than
mainly. Yeah, it was. I got to admit it was. But we were like, we'd all get a bit tired in a way, but it was really interesting. And I had going into a character was funny. And yeah, going into the nasty side, it's like sitting here doing the meditations, and I try occasionally to like be real and like, no, we're all real people, and 1 minute I could like freak out or overreact or whatever, and we all have it in us, and that's what he wanted us to do. And it was really interesting, man. I liked that class. I liked it a lot. It was tough, but I did like it. But and then we met again in New York. Went to the top of the Empire State Building, freezing our ass off. Yeah,
because that was the other thing. I was in New York from sort of September until December was the plan, and then it was funny because I'd messaged you when I was in Madrid. I think I'd gone back to Madrid for the work I was doing, and funnily enough, we both said we're going to be in New York at the same time. So it was, I think it would have been maybe 3 years since we'd seen each other since rehearsing this play, and then we both happened to be in New York at the same time, and then I started recording and taking pictures of one of your classes, but then came to another one. It was quite an intense day that went on. I think it was all day that we did in studio in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So having never done it before, I then did like a 7-hour one and felt like someone else afterwards. But it was I still have it now, though. I sort of have like the audios that you'd sent me. So having never done it before, it was always something I sort of go back to, the heavy breathing of it's maybe like a 17, 20-minute audio that I've got. So I still do that occasionally just to relax and clear my mind, really. So it does
they've
help.
got quite a, they do, man. I've got a few more now. Check out on YouTube. And then regarding these things, I'm going to release a course to do with addiction and breath work, how breath work can really help you change your state, release the chemicals in the body, so you might not need the other things, as well as mix it with meditation. But yeah, that's in the process now. But what I do with these podcasts to get people to get to know you, I'm going to give you 10 questions that aren't going to be like amazingly deep or anything like that. Just quick questions, but I want you to answer them as quick as you can.
Okay.
We'll go through them in like a minute and a half. It's so funny. Some people have been taking 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Other people in 1 minute. Boom. But let's see how we go. 10 questions. They're quick. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
To be doing the thing that you love to do.
Nice. And what's the thing you love to do?
Acting. Actually, though, teaching. Since I came here, I used to just teach to try and earn a living, but I've actually found that it's one of the jobs that, if you like the kids, it's one of the most rewarding jobs I've ever had. And I've had a lot of jobs.
I like it. Okay. What place would you most like to visit?
Argentina.
Cool. What's your favorite color and why?
Red for Liverpool.
Yes. One thing you like about yourself?
Since quitting drinking, I feel that like all the bad side of me's gone. I feel that like I still annoy people and get wound up easily and stuff like that. But I think that like all the negative sides that used to cause problems and everything, since quitting drinking, I feel like that side of me has gone.
Beautiful, beautiful. Do you believe in God?
Yes.
Can you give us a bit more about that? Is it one specific God?
Well, I sort of grew up Catholic. I always went to Catholic schools, so that was always in me. But religion wasn't really a big thing, but I think it was more God. My dad dying was another thing from people dying. I sort of related a bit more then. But really, whenever I was struggling with alcohol, I'd always go to church, but more not to go to the mass. It was a place for me that was really peaceful and relaxing. So I sort of went through it that way, just to sort of, sorry, there's a siren going. I sort of used to be in a church just because it was peaceful when nobody else was in there. It was just a building that I always felt really calm in.
Beautiful. I like it, man. Thanks a lot. What talent would you most like to have?
Singing. I think if I could be a singer, I always wanted, because I did the acting, but I always felt that like to be, because of being on stage, I think if I could sing, I always liked the idea of doing something for a living, like say being an artist or something where you're using your talent as the job. Like with yourself, you're using just, you don't need anything to do it. Like to sing, you're just using your voice. I like the idea of that. With acting as well, you don't need, like, I like the idea of a play because you don't need any technology or anything. You can just be on stage as yourself. I like that as a thing.
No, that's beautiful. But a quick one there on the, I did 1 or 2 adverts and it was almost embarrassing. But when you're with the camera, and when you're with the camera and the distance stay there, there's no flow. That's why the plays will go on. If you could be called by any other name, what would you like to be called?
Dennis. So my stage name is Mark Dennis, and Dennis was the name of my dad. So probably Dennis.
Okay, beautiful, nice one, man. What's your favorite song at the moment? Anything?
Favorite song? I'm listening to a lot of like Ibiza chill out house dance music. I'm listening. I don't know if that counts as a song, but sort of like to relax in the house. I sort of have that playing in the background
dance music to make you relax.
But chill out dance music, not anything. So I think it's called house. I just sort of type in chill out dance music to YouTube, and then there's a picture of a beach playing, and I have that on.
Bring it on.
Or a song called a Blake Shelton song. Should be good. It's something if you did. I can't remember the name of it.
I don't know, but if you get it later, send it to me. And
Sure be cool if you did. That's the one. It'd sure be cool if you did a Blake Shelton country song. I've been listening to that a lot.
Okay, but send it to us later. No, I can put it in the comments. Okay. What is your favorite swear word?
Motherfucker. I think that's quite good.
Nice one. Wim Hof like that one as well. Okay, final question. What is your motto for life?
I think it is to try and find happiness, but I think I've always found the work side of it to motto for life. It's a tough one. I really appreciate I don't really look at the future anymore. I think planning, don't spend too much time planning, because you can find out some news one day and that changes everything. I think maybe that, I think to focus on today.
Beautiful. Like it, man. This is Mark. So cool. Right? That's really good. Oh, beautiful. Cool. I will take the weird questions. Pardon me, just had coffee. Okay, so what we're doing here, but like just basically the story. So again, might as well mention quickly that I know you've tried AA and 12-step program stuff, and I mention it because I have, and that's how I went through it. But you have different ways of doing things. But maybe we want to go back as far as you want to go back and tell us your story, man, about what you were like as a kid, what happened, what moments in life, and what happened when you started drinking, where that went in the stages, and then where you are now, really, and what was the catalyst in between.
I'll be as honest as I can with this. I'm not sure who's going to see it, but I mean, there's obviously maybe not really that important from going to the meetings and things. One thing I always found though, that like my childhood was really nice. I had a really, really nice childhood. I've gone to a lot of meetings and heard a lot of sad stories about abuse and these types of things. And luckily I've never had any of that. My drinking, I always think it was maybe linked with depression, but that was when it was only at its worst. But for me, the problem was I wanted to start drinking, but I didn't like any alcohol. So when I was maybe like 15, 16, I wanted to, because of being like from England, the culture of going to pubs and to bars, but I looked really young. So I had to wait until I was started drinking maybe about 16, 17, but nothing out of the ordinary, just being young and trying to go out. But because I looked so young, I couldn't go anywhere. So I had to wait really until I was 18. But I used to just be sick. I used to just vomit constantly. I just couldn't. I was drinking like them Alka-Pop things, like Smirnoff Ice and Blue Wicked, this cheap stuff that tasted more like pop to get drunk. But the time really, to say childhood, had a really nice family. Just lived with my mum, dad, and brother in Leicestershire, and then drinking for me, the time that it sort of got worse, I used to just sort of drink on weekends, near enough every weekend, as the culture in England, going out with friends and drinking, but it's never really a problem. The first time it got worse was when I went to university. The first time I was living alone, because I think I was always conscious of living with my mum and dad and brother, that things like drinking in the morning or drinking when you were hungover and stuff like that wasn't accepted, because my dad drank a lot, but like maybe just after work as a way of unwinding and that types of things. And the same as my brother, they'd sort of sit and watch the TV and drink, whereas I never did that. I'd only drink if I was going out. So that's like, for me now, is I don't really have much of a problem being around alcohol or not drinking. The problem was once I started. But once I moved to university and I was living alone, I think I went when I was maybe in my mid-20s, but I'd always sort of just could start drinking more and more, but it was always it was accepted to do it from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That was fine. But then when I was at university and I had all this money that came through for the student loan, and in your first year of uni, lectures aren't that important, and I was just drinking. I just carried on drinking, but it was more because I was older than everyone. Some people were maybe 18, 19, whereas I'd been drinking for that amount of years. So my drinking had really progressed to the point of like the quantity that I could drink. And then it was more, one thing that really always happened was I used to drink in the mornings to get rid of the hangover. I think it must be the same way that people take drugs to sort of, they're not chasing it for the highs to stop themselves getting ill. So I used to drink that way because I used to get really bad hangovers to the point of I was just lying in bed vomiting like constantly. I couldn't drink water, would just constantly vomit for days. So if I drank, say, on a weekend, I reckon by Wednesday I'd actually feel all right again. But then Friday would come round. So I like had that going on for years. And then when I went to university, that was when it really picked up that I was drinking every single day because of how much I was, say, drinking. I'd then wake up in the morning to drink to get rid of the hangover. But I'd carry on drinking to the point that then the next day I had that hangover feeling again. So like the hair of the dog, but I was doing the hair of the dog that lasted for the day. but
do you think though there was a relation, because I know you said you wasn't majorly drinking when you were younger, but then it started to grow a little bit and went to university, there was more freedom, but you couldn't do that at home, but you had the temptation to keep drinking when you were at home?
Yeah, sometimes what I used to do was if I'd gone out on a Saturday, I'd want to drink, so I'd see if anybody wanted to meet up on a Sunday as an excuse to go out to drink again. So like some of the days of like being in bed on a Sunday, I'd want to be drinking but couldn't because of, say, like my brother and dad would drink in the house, but I never did. If I started doing that, it would be like, why are you drinking? Whereas when my dad or brother did it, it was fine because they weren't drinking to get drunk. Whereas when I was doing it, I was doing it to get rid of the effects of the hangover. And I did it a couple of times hiding. I can remember when I went to college when I was about 17, drinking on the bus at maybe like 7 a.m. I can remember hiding cans in my bag, and I was on like a bus going to Northampton drinking at that time. And yeah, about 17. So that was maybe a time that I was experimenting with drinking in the mornings and hiding alcohol from people. But definitely the freedom was when anytime I think my alcoholism was bad was when it was the freedom of being alone at university, being alone in Spain, like being on my own, being able to drink as much as I wanted without anybody knowing. And I'd drink like in a room on my own as well. I wouldn't really be out in the bar socializing. It was me drinking alone. But it was more at university. But then what I remember something that stuck in my mind when I was studying college. So I went to college to study acting at the age of 21, and I used to have to drive to get there. So I'd be driving in hungover. And then I remember one of the teachers saying that when you're studying acting and you have to rehearse, if you're known as someone who's unreliable, people won't want to work with you. So when I went to university, that stuck in my mind, but then the alcohol took over. So I ended up leaving university after 2 years and retook the year at a different one. So I was at Northampton University and went to a university in Leicester. So after everything that happened in Northampton of being known as someone who was drunk all the time, I thought, right, I'll start again in Leicester. And I did. But then the thing is, you have one night out with everybody and they think like, oh, you drank a lot last night. But then they think, no, that's what I'm really like. The bit where I'm like pretending to be sober is the lie. And then I got known again. I got known as another reputation as someone who was hungover, turning up to lectures drunk and these types of things. And that was where it was always having a negative effect on the work. I could never understand how people could work, and especially like as actors, there's so many famous people that were struggling with addictions and stuff, but still working, whereas I could never do that. I always used to get that hungover that I used to drink to sort of stop the sickness, if anything, to sort of like feel drunk again instead of feeling hungover that I used to do.
Yeah, did you find then, so it was, what was the relief that you got when you drank early on? Because there's one thing about drinking and enjoying a drink and liking it. And then there's the morning after, because I always had that thing as well. It took me a few years to get there, probably late 20s, when it was the morning after you would want it, or you'd even wait till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But it was always looking for that next one. But like, I used to think it was a physical thing, but then I realized later on it was a mental thing. Do you think there was anything you were escaping from, or like things?
I think it was the enjoyment. Something that I really found that when I got sober was being bored, feeling really bored all the time. And one of the worst things for me was to ever do anything sober. If I ever went anywhere, I was always drunk, because just the thought of like doing these types of things, I thought was just boring. Alcohol was a way that sort of, I was guaranteed that regardless of how shit the thing could be, if I'm drunk, then it will be all right. So I always used that. But like you were saying, like chasing sort of the drink, I can remember so many times that I used to have to know that there was alcohol in there for the morning. If I'd like wake up and there wasn't there. So like when I was on holiday with friends and stuff, I'd be saying like, oh, if we're in the bar, we need to get like bottles to take away. And they were like, why? We'll be going to bed. It's like, no, not for now, for tomorrow. So I'd like so many times, but then I'd just pass out and not drink anything. But it was just the security of knowing it was there. I used to get so anxious thinking that like, if I wake up in the morning and I can't drink something, I'm going to like feel hungover and can't do anything. So that was always a thing of needing the alcohol. But the thing is as well, this was something I was saying to my girlfriend tonight, I can easily not drink from, if I knew I wasn't going to get really drunk to the point of like I could drink as much as I want, I never saw the point. So friends would like go out, so you coming out for a couple or you coming out for a drink, and I'd not bother, or I'd drink Coke, because unless I could get to the point of that drunk, I didn't see the point. So like my brother would have friends around to the house and I'd always be sober on like a weekend if we were staying in. They like didn't want to go to the pub, but I didn't see the point if I was staying in drinking. So the actual thing for me was once I started, something just changed the mentality. And that was the one thing that I'd never been aware of until university, of needing to drink. And I'd never I suppose the first time I ever felt physically addicted was going through a withdrawal. And I remember lying in bed sort of physically shaking and just vomiting, but not vomiting anything else, like dry heaving, retching. And that was the first time I thought, like, this is like physically going through alcohol withdrawal. I'd had hangovers, but I'd never gone through anything like that. It was sort of shivering, then sweating, and then cold sweats. And I'd never had that before. So like waking up on the pillars just sort of drenched in like a cold sweat. I'd never experienced that before. And
When
that
it
was
was
the first
progressing,
time.
though, these things, and you kept drinking and stuff, did it affect your life in any ways, as in like things you couldn't do, things you could do, relationships, or was there anything that happened in your life that made you want to drink more?
I suppose because I was at university and I was bored a lot, so I used to drink. Again, I was thinking sometimes it was linked to depression, but then it was linked with boredom, and sometimes they're linked together. But I used to drink because of being really bored. But then the problem is, if you're depressed or you feel bored, drinking just makes that worse a lot of the time. And I think as well, I was sort of, especially when I was at university, when I was drinking, like the quantities that I was doing, it was really affecting the course. So then, like when I transferred to the next university, I was like, right, I'm going to just focus on studying. And then the alcohol constantly was more important and took over. But I'd always sort of avoided relationships because a relationship meant that you had to do things with the girlfriend that you didn't want to do on weekends and stuff. And I always thought that like I'd want to just lie in bed hungover than have to like go around someone's mum's house and these types of things. But when the first relationship I had, the first serious one, I was at university, and she didn't drink anything, and I was at one of like the worst stages of my drinking, so it couldn't have been a worse mix together. So she was from Gibraltar, and then when I used to go and see her family, none of them drank. So then I couldn't, I say I was just drinking every day, all day, to sort of be in the beach in Gibraltar in the sun and everything and drinking constantly. But to them, I think I was like the typical like Brit abroad, the sort of binge drinking types of things. But I'm looking back now, like my dad sort of said to me, like, you're going out to dinner like with your girlfriend and you just like in a state and it's embarrassing for her and this types of things. So that was the first time I've really thought that my drinking was affecting someone else and
Yeah.
being conscious of that. And then used to cause so many problems and so many arguments and everything. So I used to then stop drinking, but then to try and like still wanted to drink, but I was telling her I wasn't. So then that was when it was lying and trying to hide it and everything, and just didn't work. And the worst time I can remember was being when I transferred back to Leicester. So the worst time of the alcohol was at the first uni, but then it got even worse in the second one. Having transferred there, thinking I'm transferring here to start again and like focus on the course, it then got even worse. And I think because I transferred, I didn't know anybody. When like I started the first university, we all started together, and that's when we made friends. Whereas the second time, that was the first time I felt like alone and
Right.
was drinking. I was drinking then for the loneliness that like on a weekend, everybody from the course is meeting up and I didn't have any friends or anything to do. So I think, well, that doesn't stop me from drinking. I don't need anybody else to drink. So I used to do that. But I can remember just seeing, I think I drank one day something like 8 litres of cider. And I remember just seeing like bottles and bottles. And I thought, I don't know how many days this has been happening for, because it was, my floor was just covered in like empty 2 litre bottles of cider. And I thought, like, there's definitely something not right, something going on here. And that was the first time I was sort of diagnosed with depression and was told to sort of take antidepressants, but then still drank. So then I'd sort of have like a counter effect because the alcohol affects the antidepressants. So I'd sort of be like this, and then like the alcohol would take me even lower than I should be at. So it was
Right.
sort of that like the alcohol was counteracting the depressants. So I'd hit like really, really lows of feeling, yeah, just to say a lot of loneliness and a lot of depression. But the alcohol used to help temporarily, and then it really doesn't. But
How long were you taking the pills for?
I took them for a long time, and even after I stopped drinking. But the funny thing was, once I stopped drinking, I didn't want to take them anymore because I felt that I was using alcohol for that reason. So they say like, oh, it was depression, but I think it was the alcohol that was affecting the way that I felt. I think maybe I felt depressed at moments and used alcohol more to feel better, but I don't really feel that the antidepressants were helping that much, because when I stopped drinking, I thought that like, this is just things that happen that make you feel like this. So I always felt as well that they sort of numb your emotions. And that was something that I used to find that like with alcohol, I was having such drastic mood swings of feeling like the depressants were helping me, but were they blocking something? Were they like, sometimes when wanting to feel upset but couldn't physically cry, or this types of things, because I felt like I'm taking this tablet that's preventing me from doing that. It was really hard to take them. I don't know if you've ever taken them, but they really can numb your emotions. So once I was sober, I think for maybe a year afterwards or 2 years afterwards, I felt I didn't want to take anything that was affecting the way that I felt.
Super cool. But with that one, yeah, because the numbing of the emotions, and I haven't taken them, but I've heard enough stories. And to me, it sounds on a similar part with anything that you're taking, like an addiction with a drug or an alcohol, where you're avoiding those emotions, you're avoiding the present, basically escaping reality. Now, and I don't know enough about them to be able to say, but it sounds a bit like that. But then what did you find when you stopped taking them and you weren't drinking? You find with your emotional state, how is life regarding that?
I felt like clear. I felt like I had this clarity. I suppose the same way when I stopped drinking, I felt that like getting your Sunday back was one thing. Like waking, the thing that I really appreciate. The thing as well was thinking that like the worst time you can feel now for me is either feeling like ill or feeling tired. Whereas like having the hangovers that I've had, knowing that that's gone. So like once that was gone, and then from stopping the medication, especially from like when I was studying acting, I've sort of focused more, like I've been working more as a teacher now, but when I was studying acting, like the antidepressants didn't help, because of trying to like access emotions, as I say, like feeling like you needed to cry but couldn't because you're taking this thing that's like blocking. It's really strange, but I took them for a long time. I think overall 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years, maybe I was taking antidepressants for, but for maybe 3 years of those, I was drinking. So I don't really feel that like they were helping me. They'd help me when I was going through periods, because I'd always tried to stop until the reason that I stopped drinking happened. I'd always go through periods where I tried to stop. I could go for like months or weeks, but then as soon as I drank again, the reason that I'd want to stop was the hangover. There's only a couple of people I know that had hangovers like I had, where like I vomited blood and vomited like for days and stuff like that. So some people say they're hungover, and I think that like, my hangovers was like when people say I woke up and I had like a headache this morning. I think that like, I never had that. But I never drank to the point of having it was like to the point of passing out. So the hangover was always the worst one. But it's funny because the people that know me now say they can never imagine me drinking, and the people that knew me before say they can't imagine me sober. Whereas you were someone who was in the transition, because we were rehearsing that play, and I stopped drinking during that. But I was going through, as I say, the hangovers and the withdrawal of the sweating. And it's them days where you're just sweating constantly, alcohol out your system. And obviously what you'd been through, you can just see it in somebody.
It was one period you stopped, and then I think you started again. But with you, it was like only a few days, but then you were so heavy that then we'd see you afterwards. And it's never nice to see it, but it's a few days, isn't it, of horrible pain. And I've seen my brother, I've been there a million times. Well, I used to just drink to cover it, but then when you try and stop, you got to accept these few days of hell. But there are other ways now. You can get injections to do with vitamins and stuff, and you can help yourself. But I've been there, so I knew what it was like. But there's no other way than kind of a cold turkey, and you were doing it. But it's amazing how it affects everything, because you couldn't. It was a few days in, and you couldn't communicate with us. I remember we had like a meeting about the play, and you were just gone. Like, and everyone's, "What is Mark okay?" I'm like, "No, man, he's stopped drinking. He's fucked." Basically,
yeah, we had a meal. We had a meal with the cast and the teacher who was like the director, and he said to me, "Are you going to say anything tonight? Because you haven't said a word." And it was just couldn't. I was just like you said, I was just going through a heavy alcohol withdrawal from maybe a few days, and I can remember like I could never eat anything was the problem. Some people can have like a full English breakfast and that helps them, whereas because I was vomiting, like my hangover just meant I was sick, just constantly vomiting for days. So I'd like lose a lot of weight, be really dehydrated, but then sweating So as I say, like if I drank on a weekend, by Wednesday after eating again, like I'd start to feel all right like 3 days
Yeah, you feel all
afterwards.
right. But then it can lead back to it. Okay, so in what do you think was the changing point? I know that you tried AA a little bit with me and stuff, but what was the changing point for you? Was it anybody else, like as in relationships, or is it kind of you just kind of got it? And how long have you been sober now as well?
I always wanted to, I always felt that like until I met you, my uncle was in AA, but I only really knew him because my dad died. He was ill when we sort of got in contact with him. So I was like, I'd not really known my uncle for all the years I was drinking. You were the first person I'd met who'd ever been sober, like a recovering alcoholic who'd gone to AA. So I remember one day asking you so many questions when we were walking around Barcelona together because I'd tried to quit so many times and I never felt like I had a reason to. You sort of told me your story and I thought that like, not that I wanted that, but the problem I always found was whenever I tried to quit it, people saying why. And it was
Yeah.
like having to constantly explain yourself why you didn't want to drink. And I thought that
Yeah.
like if I had a reason, that would
Mm.
be the reason.
No, but that's a really good point that I'd forgotten. I remember you going through that because there's several sides. There's like some people come to me and I don't have the answers at all, but I can just say what I did. But then some people won't understand it. So it's a bit like you need that empathy. Although a drunk is a pain in the ass, man, especially when you're sober and you see like fuck. You need that empathy or a bit of understanding, but you also don't need someone to kind of hold your hand completely. But it's because if you've got your friends saying, "Oh, well, why and what," and maybe it's not a problem, probably one or two people might have said, "Yeah, you need to stop." But if people really don't understand it, what you're going through, it's very difficult for you to be able to explain. That's why I think it doesn't have to be in 12 steps. It can be anything to explain what's going on and then see someone else who's done something similar. That's why these things that we're doing now, I think, are important so people can see that, okay, you need to speak, you need to share, you need to have empathy and then help and share with other people. But there is a lot of people who just don't get it. I'm like, why are you stopping drinking? Or what does it mean?
Mhm.
And such. But that's where I believe it is important to find other people. And whether people like AA or not, there's a group of bloody people in there that know what it's like. A real mixture of personalities. So you can explain stuff and you can get to that point that's come up in these calls that you're not alone, you know, because it leads you down that lonely street. And especially with you and like any drunk, you're surrounded by bottles at the end of the day. That was me. And you're doing it on
Mhm.
your own. So you feel like you've got nowhere to go, but there are a few places, you know.
The reason as well is people like going to AA and meeting other people who drank like I drank and can relate to that. They're the people that don't ask you why you don't drink or why you're
Yeah.
stopping drinking. The people that can't relate to that are the ones that say, "Are you sure you can't just have a few?" If you try, like, if say I've gone for a period of not drinking, you seem all right, like you never seem that bad, but like they're not the people that like my close friends and brother and people have seen me like when I was drinking to the states I was in, but it's the people that don't really know you, but like they don't know like the side of like sat in a room on your own drinking liters and liters of cider. Like they don't see that. If they saw that, they wouldn't question what you were doing or why you wanted to stop. Whereas the one thing that I always benefited from going to AA was listening to other people's stories. I always felt I benefited more from listening than from sharing. But it was always especially I'm now coming up to it'll be 4 years on the 20th of March, so just about 3 weeks, I think. So from when I was in New York last year, there was people who were going through their first times, whereas it was strange for them to ask me because of like say having 3 years. Like at the first days when I went with you, it was
Yeah.
strange that now like people ask me from the position that I was in. And it's strange that like the time was always people say not to count the times and others say they do. And I was sort of related more to people that had say I had 10 years sober because I think you're obviously doing something right than someone who's like say done a month. But it was more I was doing things that I always regretted that I'd never even dream of doing sober. So I just kept on doing that. The hangovers were the reason that I initially tried to stop. And then the things that happened, like the worst things that happened in my life from drinking alcohol, were then why I thought I'm definitely not drinking anymore now. And from like asking about if I believed in God and things like this, from what happened, I can remember being in church, just sort of praying that if everything was all right, then I wouldn't drink again. And haven't since then. So I was drinking on, I think it was a Saturday and a Sunday. And then on the Monday, thought that like, if everything's all right, then I'll not drink again. Sort of made a promise to myself, I think. But I think the other thing as well is from the time at the beginning, once I'd stopped and it was maybe a month or anything, it didn't really seem as important to like, oh, if I started drinking again, I've only been a month. But like after nearly 4 years to then drink again, I'd sort of hate to do that to myself of like having 4 years, having never drank anything, to then one day change all that and think I'm now back at day one of gone from like 4 years of sobriety. But I never know the reason that would make me drink again is the hardest thing. I never know what could be the point of wanting to really.
But that's nice. I always no, it's really good actually. But I always still, if for the first year or so, I had like a bit of fear about it. But I'd hear too many kind of stories in AA where it's like, oh, but you can't drink and do that. And I would say, if I want to drink, I'll drink. But luckily, I didn't want to. You know? And I still got the 1% in my mind, but it's 1%. It's fuck all. I don't really think about it at all. I think it's completely changed. But just to be aware of it, you know, because I've seen it so many times that people go back and back and drink again. But then it sounds to me something to do with that, not necessarily the church or anything, that what they do talk about in AA and in general in spirituality, to help us get out of the ego and get out of our minds. You're believing in the higher power, and something there maybe helped you, would you say, to be able to just, if you like, contact with something else, or to believe in something else and say, I will do this. If you kind of look after me, I'll look after you. Do you think that helped in a way? Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think because I never really, like, my family weren't religious to the point of going to church and this sort of thing. It was always something I did. So I'd like never wanted to go to church when there was anybody there. But then I suppose from like my dad dying, I felt that like I had that contact with someone else, with say like a God. But then because of having this sort of thinking about the spirituality of the people that have died that are in your life, like always thinking about them every day. So I think it's that spirituality. But I never did AA to the point of the steps, but I always appreciated going, and I really think it did help with my sobriety a lot. And it's always when I was in New York and on my own, because as I say, the times I drank when I was on my own and felt bored or depressed and lonely in times like that. So I felt that in New York, and I'd always go to a meeting and always felt better from,
Yeah.
I wouldn't really share a lot. I just say I'm visiting from England and these types of things, but to listen. And when you were in New York, that was when someone asked me if I wanted to share my story. I can't remember what it's called in it. Is it being initiated? I can't remember how you say
No,
it.
but that sounds really weird. You are now in
I can't remember what he said. I can't remember how he called it.
the square. But no, so Perry Street, and if anyone knows New York meetings, it's a famous one. Perry Street, New York, and yeah, I think we can say that. Yeah, you can find it online. And no, I can't remember. Yes, you'd been to a meeting, someone asked you to share. And it's just like you tell your story a bit kind of like this in a way, but no one's asking any questions. You just talk for 20 minutes or so. And it's really good because I don't think you'd shared your story before, and you sat in front of everyone.
And then that was the first time that someone had said, from coming here tonight, like, you've reminded me why I don't drink anymore. So I felt that like that was what I got from it. I always used to hear these terrible, horrendous stories, but there was always bits that I could relate to, and I thought that's why I don't drink. But I still, the thing is, I'd like to drink, but I wouldn't like to drink to think like, oh, I wish I could have like 3 or 4, because I never did that. I just sort of miss, not the fact of like, it's hard. There's like a small part of me that thinks that like, oh, I wish I was doing that. But then it was just like when you would equate everything that it came with,
Yeah.
there's no way I could like carry on living that life that I was doing physically. Really, I was just exhausted of being hungover constantly and constantly like not being able to do anything on a Sunday, or like I could always think that like if anything was planned and it was, well, I don't know, because I might be hungover the next day and these types of things. But I was more scared of being sober, having to do things like going to parties or social occasions sober. That was my biggest fear. So I used to
How is
miss
that
having
now?
out. I find not living in England fine. Being in England and being in like a Weatherspoon on a weekend, I mean, I used to drink to be in there. So like now I don't drink, I just don't go. But being with friends and things, it always used to be hard, because when I tried to stop drinking before, they'd be the ones saying, like, encouraging you to drink, because I say I didn't really have a reason not to. I just wanted to stop. Whereas now, because I've not drank for so long, there's not like that pressure of wanting to. But not living in England, there's not that binge culture. So from like living in Spain and going on dates and these types of things, I wasn't with someone drinking. Like girls
Yeah.
that I'd meet and these types of things from like different areas of Europe, or living in like now living in Mexico, there's not the same culture that comes with the drinking. So
Yeah,
like
it's not.
tonight, no, like tonight when I was at the restaurant, I was seeing like a couple in say like their 50s drinking Coke. And I said that like I've never saw that in England. You'd never see like someone's dad or something like having a meal and drinking a soft drink. It always just comes with alcohol, whereas it doesn't in other countries. So once you leave England,
Yeah,
it is a lot easier.
it's a different. Yeah, there's different ways, but also, would you say though? What about with the boredom? Say it's been about 4 years now that you haven't drank. How do you find that these days?
The boredom can still be a lot, but still struggle with that. But I think it's hard as well, like being in like the lockdown, like that was always a thing. But I was glad though that I didn't drink because I thought if I wanted to drink and couldn't, if everywhere's shut, like what would I be doing? But the boredom can still, but I get bored like easily, really easily. I can get bored. Like if I'm in New York, the novelty of like a new place can soon wear off. But
Yeah, yeah,
I do a lot of exercise, but I've always done that. So that was the other thing. When I wasn't drinking, I was really healthy. I eat really healthy, go to the gym a lot, but then I'd drink on a weekend. So like by Monday, I'd be sort of my body's trying to sort itself out, going back to where it was. And then Friday had come round again. And because I don't smoke, but I used to like to smoke when I was drinking to like feel more messed up. So I used to chain smoke, and then I'd like wake up on Monday morning, couldn't breathe, be hungover, and I'd just go through. Like that was going on for years, and I'm glad that that's gone. But enjoy. I do enjoy like the morning now, sort of waking up in the
yeah.
morning and
Really.
being able to go for a run and something like that. Like I'm so glad that the illness, the vomiting has gone. Like I was vomiting like out every single weekend, sometimes during the week as well. And I'm just glad that that stopped. But the boredom can still be difficult, but it's easier to try and find more things that like I'd never have been able to do this job of working with kids and working in a school and going to school for like 7 a.m. and these types of things and being in a classroom with kids if I was still drinking. So I feel though that like you've got more time on your hands, which is sort of, it can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. It's depending on the time, can be
But
like bad luck when I'd want to be drinking or when I'd usually be drinking. That's when the boredom could be. But
it's from the outside, from me, like it sounds like you're doing all kinds of things, man. You know, and you're getting on with it, and you're not taking the pills is amazing, and not drinking is amazing. You know, but I just want to go back quickly to the point, maybe that catalyst or the change, and you mentioned the promise, and it's something in this little 7 day challenge to make. It's only for 7 days, and I've got things that I need to promise, and because it's the promise to yourself and maybe to something else, but then also making that decision because I think we've really got to make the decision, and no one can force that upon you. But whatever happens in life, when you decide to do something, you really, really go for it. That's it, because you're also telling the subconscious, "This is happening, and I'm going to do it." Now, I would say that quite often, but maybe I didn't believe it. But when I made that decision, eventually, I never drank again. And what about you then? What would you say that moment was when you really decided to change the promise, the catalyst, or to something else? What was it? That moment in church or something else?
I sort of, I think I was, I always wanted to quit, but I was always saying like, right, I've quit now, and I always knew I hadn't. I thought I'm just going to drink again eventually. I could think like I could go 6 months without drinking, but I know eventually one day I'm going to start drinking again. So I'd go from like weeks or months, and then I think, what's the point if I'm going to drink again? And like someone says, do you want to drink? Yeah, because I didn't have a reason. It was only until that point, that catalyst, as you say, was this like event that happened this night that I thought, like, no, this is the point now. This is when I say, no, I'm not drinking anymore. I've now decided. And I think it was definitely a promise to myself of like how stupid I've been and how it could have changed my life forever based on alcohol. So I thought that like it was a wake up call really that I'd had of like how say I was doing things that I'd never even dream of doing sober. And then I thought I was just something had happened and I used to think that was bad, but was it enough that's like shocked me really? I think it was more the scared and the fear of what could
Right.
have happened was the point of I'm not going to drink again. And as I say, going to church was more a place for me to go to be alone. I think it was like I was sort of talking to myself. I was making this promise to myself in an
Right.
environment that I knew was safe and nobody would listen or care. Because people would go there and pray, it would be a place that you would sort of left alone. So that
Yeah.
was one of the reasons I'd always go to a church because it was a place that you could be on your own. And if you went sort of during the day when there wasn't anything on, it was empty. So I always found it was a place to sort of think clearly, because it was so quiet in there, and it was an enclosed environment, and it was dark, and you could be on your own and think. And I think at the time, I really did know that I wasn't going to drink again. Having never having that, I'd always decided when I was hungover I wasn't going to drink again, and then I'd sober up, and the Friday would come around, or Saturday, and I'd drink again. Whereas this moment was one that was like, no, this was scary. I think I was like, the first time I was really, really scared of what could have happened was the wake up call.
That's like, yeah, sometimes we need that. I always repeat God, gift of desperation. Just had enough, man. So so long. But yeah, so the promise, it's funny you said that, and it's very important to yourself. But did you make it to anyone else or anything else, or you just said, no, I'm doing this?
I think because I was, say, what happened, I was sort of waiting for test results. So I think I'd sort of made a promise that, like, if the test results come back clear, so I think I like had that in my mind. So I'd taken like an AIDS test, and I was sort of thinking that if like I made the promise to sort of God then, that if the tests come back clear, then like my promise will be of like to not drink again. But to say, it was just things that I was doing. But the hardest thing and the scariest thing for me was I was doing these things on my own. I wasn't like encouraged by anybody. I didn't like have a group of friends that were encouraging. It was me being on my own, drunk in the streets. And in a city like Barcelona, when you're in like a red light district and there's drug dealers and prostitutes and these types of things, and you like can't remember what's happened, I'd wake up and think that like it's scary what could have happened. And I'm so fortunate that I was never arrested or never assaulted or assaulted anybody else or these types of things. And I really do think it was a matter of time until what happened, but it could have been a lot worse than it was. And
Yeah, you just reminded me of those. Yeah, no shit, man, because Barcelona is great, but I've had a few other people that I was doing it, and then other people afterwards when I was sober, I'd see them go off, and I'm like, woof, you're just a sitting duck for something really bad to happen. You know, there's some nasty areas there.
especially in like a pickpocket in city like Barcelona, where they're preying on people that are vulnerable to rob. Someone who's drunk, a drunk tourist, is the ideal. And I used to be in a state that like couldn't defend myself, or also times when I'd wake up and not remembered what had happened. So
Right.
it was more that living on my own and these types of things. Like when I was at university, I felt that like I could have fallen down this, like I fell down the stairs once and damaged sort of the ligaments in my knee and these types of things. And I thought I could have cracked my head open and no one would have known or found me. And I used to just sort of put myself in these positions. But as I say, whenever I quit drinking before, you'd forget that. Your memory soon forgets how bad and how shit you feel to
Yeah.
wanting to drink again.
But that's a funny one with the reminders that it used to happen in a lot in the meetings, and it still happens now. And I'd see other people, I'm like, no disrespect, but you do me a favor by seeing you fucked and trying to get better.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, you know, like, oh, I've been sober 20 years and I went out for 6 months, and you're like, oof, you can see it, and it's horrible. But also, mine wanted to get to desperation, but yours sounds like they call it rock bottom.
Uh-huh.
You'd seen you, and it's seen you were going down, down, up and down, up and down, but then something happened that you really, yeah, it's a good thing. Maybe, you know, that fear was there, and this is really, really enough, and that's propelled you to go the other way.
I think as well, though, when you talked about someone that helped you, like you were there for me in the fact that I knew that you were in AA. So I knew that I'm not too sure how many years you'd gone at the time sober. So then I felt that like we tried to do it once, I think, with the sponsor and everything, but I never wanted it to affect our friendship because you said that there's things that you'd require from me as a
Yeah,
sponsor. And what I took from the meetings was the listening from people, but the things like the writing and stuff, this was funny how we got in contact recently. I'd started writing sort of a script, but writing about sort of my experience of being in AA and being in this class and everything. And I thought about you and then messaged you. And then this was where we came up of like, oh, you're doing this. And it's, say I was talking to my girlfriend earlier about like coincidences and these types of things, but from like meeting you that one day in the acting class and then was rehearsing this play to then we were both in New York at the same time to then this, it's like, there's coincidences, but then there's things I always think happen for a reason. And the reason that you meet people, because as I say, the first time I shared my story, you were in the meeting to hear it, and you were the person who was with me when I'd quit. And there's not many people that know me from before and after. So the people who know me before are my close friends who know now why I don't drink, but the people after could never imagine me what I was like before, whereas you saw both, unfortunately.
Yeah, so both sides. I saw the pain in those moments, and then the drunkenness. And yeah, if you're a proper drunk, man, you're just a waste of space. It's like you're almost starting normal, then by the end of the night, everyone's like, "What the hell?" Doesn't matter who you are. It's just it goes that way, you know. But then you'd manage to come back. But yeah, I'm glad though that you got really, really scared, man, because that's the turning point by the sounds of it. But you're in the place now where there's other people who are going to mention things to you and come to you and ask you. And it's not like I don't have the answer. That's what I keep saying. And other people don't. And AA doesn't all these things. But it's been able to communicate and connect and to talk and say, well, look, I did this and I haven't drank since, you know, because it seems to be the main one from what I can tell, addiction wise. And it's also the one where maybe other heavy drugs and then people always end up with alcohol, but then realize it's just as bad, you know, and it's a bit more acceptable in society. But if we can find a place where there's a bit of nurturing as well, that's why just to me, without planning anything, I have ideas with the course, but like just to get people to connect and share the story, I think is key.
Yeah, and I think it's that was the one thing I always took from the meeting. So because I never like to tell people that I didn't do the steps, because some people try and enforce you on it. You need a sponsor, you need the steps. But from one thing I saw on that like Perry Street meeting, they said there's not a wrong way to get sober, or there's not a right way. There was whatever works for you. So like there's not a wrong way to get sober. For me, was what works for me is going to the meetings and sharing and listening. Like I don't sort of do the steps, and I've never had a sponsor, but I've got sort of fortunately a close sort of family and friends of people, and like yourself, there's people I can talk to and things like that. But it was more of the meetings of listening to people sharing was what I always took from I suppose from when you shared your story and relating to that. And then that's the one thing that I always went back to the meetings was sharing and listening, and just it always does remind you that you can have a life that's better. I think it's that I can always sort of remember and fantasize and dream about, oh, I wish I was drinking and these types of things. But it's only once you've gone to a meeting that you realize that you're hearing all the things. You only hear the negative stuff. Whereas when you're on your own, you don't sit there and think all day about the negative stuff when you want to drink. Whereas when you're in a meeting and people are talking about why they don't and how much better their lives are after they've got sober, that's the stuff that makes you sort of go back to meetings from sharing.
Yeah, it is like, and because again, there's so many different opinions about it, and it can be like quite heavy and a bit like, could say depressing, and oh my God, everyone's talking about the problems. And it can be a bit like that, but there's also lots of positive there. And then like seeing what's changed in people, and that can give you hope. Or what something's gone wrong, you're like, fuck, I don't want to do that again. And it's knocking the ego out of the way as well, and saying, yeah, I can relate to this person, even though I've nothing to do with them, never met them, but there's something there. And that was always a game changer for me. Just being able to relate, like you say, and listen. And then occasionally you don't want to share, but someone says something like, oh yeah, and then you share, and then you just feel 10 times better. Yeah.
I always found as well, I used to go to meetings where I didn't know anybody because I felt that like it was easier to share. I think like I'd rather listen to someone's story from another part of the world, or from someone that I can't really relate to of what they've been through, to hear your story and what you like, your experience, rather than like, I'd never have gone to an AA meeting in my town because I thought there's not really, not one that we'd know each other, but like I think I'd rather hear from someone I don't know in your experience, that like rather than listening to someone that I think like, oh, we went to this school together, or you've worked here. And I always, especially like being in Barcelona where people are visiting from different countries or they've got different lives, and being in New York and these types of meetings, sharing and listening to things that you pick out from that, like say someone who's grown up in New York and's gone through all these types of things, as opposed to like living in the same town as somebody. The experience is can't really vary in contrast to someone's completely different life, but you can still relate to each other of this struggle that you have with alcohol. So I always like being in meetings where it's different ages, but not listening to the same story. I stopped going to the meeting in Barcelona because it was the same people and the same faces saying the same things, which didn't really help me. I always preferred to just constantly hear someone else's story of what I could relate to and things like that I took from sharing, really. And I think it was always nicer, the freedom that you get of sharing with someone that you don't know and listening to their stories. So there's no like prejudgment of, that's the one thing I might expect from like my town. I think like I don't really might not be as shocked as what I'm going to hear than if there's someone that I don't have a clue who they are or where they're from or what they've done.
Well, just on that note, though, within like a finishing point, if you like, what advice could you give to someone? Because again, we've mentioned AA and the steps and different things. You kind of did, kind of didn't, but you managed to do it, man. What advice would you give to someone who's right in the middle of addictions right now and they're not quite sure what to do?
I definitely recommend going to a meeting knowing that there's no pressure in doing anything.
Yeah.
So like when I first went there, like I say, I didn't know if it needed a sponsor, how AA worked, because that was why before I'd gone to AA, I was asking you, excuse me, I was asking you so many questions on what it was like and everything. So I definitely recommend going just to see what it's like. But then another thing as well is people would tell me to go to different meetings. If you don't like this one, try another one. So I think the one thing that you'll benefit from anyone who is sort of struggling with an addiction, from going to a meeting, you're knowing that you don't have to say anything, but you're with people that can relate to what you're going through, that people of all different lives and ages and races and things like that. The one thing that you have in common, the thing that they say in AA, is a desire to stop drinking. Yeah. So it's knowing that all the people in there can relate to that. So you might not particularly like anyone or get on with anyone, but you know that there's someone in there that understands how you feel. If you're wanting to stop, then AA is a great place to go to give yourself somewhere to be. Like, as I say, being bored and depressed and on your own, knowing that there's a meeting there. I was always grateful that there was meetings that were available.
Yeah.
That having that there, but really going into it with an open mind and seeing what works for you. I tried the steps and tried sort of going through the AA, but I felt that like what benefited me was going there to listen to other people and relating, and that's what helped me, but also trying to figure out what it is. But I really think that had I gone to AA before, because I think I did go with you once, but I then carried on drinking because, say, like the rock bottom side hadn't happened yet. So I think it's being honest with yourself. Yeah. Like I did try to quit. If you really do honestly want to quit, then there is ways that you can do it, and going to AA is one of them. But so is sharing, so is doing things like meditation and breathing and focusing on the life that you want to have. Like I always wanted to not rely on alcohol to feel happy, or to rely on it to go to like a social event. And knowing that once the physical side of it's gone, I think it's the hardest thing was the mentality of trying to focus on these things while you're still going through alcohol withdrawal. I think the first thing is to just focus on getting it out of your system. I think whatever you've got inside yourself, whatever addiction you've got, to just get rid of that first, to then focus on the mental side of the coping strategies and the things that you can do to help. And sharing and exercise was one that always helped me. I always found that I felt better after exercising, and trying to find hobbies. So being bored easily, I've tried to do different things, that something like writing or reading, something you can do on your own that you don't rely on other people for. I always found help, because that was times that I drink. So trying to replace that with something like exercise, going for a run or going to the gym or working out, you don't need anybody else to do. So I think it's trying to replace
change the habit, change the pattern.
Yeah, the habits, change the habits that you're doing.
You said right as well, I think, with the honesty, because also it's in this little 7-day thing after day 2 or 3. It's like, look, be honest. If you don't do it, if you promise something but it doesn't quite happen, then so what? Just keep going, because we can really batter ourselves over the head. And, oh my God, I've done the thing I didn't want to do, and blah, blah, blah. And just keep going, try again. Because like I say to a million people, like it took me a year or 2 of going and thinking about it and trying before eventually the penny dropped, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's knowing that you're not on your own. If you need someone like a sponsor, then I think I understand why people go through the steps and that process and have a sponsor. So I think it is something that can help, but I just think that it's very hard to do on your own. So I've done it on my own in the fact that I haven't had a sponsor, but I haven't done it on my own in the fact that I haven't had support from people.
Yeah.
But it's just, I never thought, it was hard because from being in the meeting on the first day, when you're in there, you can never imagine yourself when people say how many years they've got. And then I'm coming
Yeah,
up
I
to
know.
4. And the
And
time,
you're looking around like, what the fuck? But yeah, 4 years, man. It's really impressive. Really impressive.
and it's I do think now, though, after a certain amount of time's passed, that's one of the things that keeps me sober. Thinking I've ruined all that. Like I have this countdown of how long it's been for myself, of how long it's gone, and these types of things. To think that, like, I don't know what would make me want to. I mean, there's times when I want to drink, but I don't know what would make me actually drink.
Right.
And I think
Cool.
it would take. I think it would take a lot. I don't know how you feel. If there's ever a time that what.
No, there isn't. Luckily, it doesn't come across my mind. I've got plenty of little addictions, if you want to call them that, and here, there, and everywhere. But no, well, if anything, I had it years ago, and it was like, oh fuck, I could really do with a drink. But there was a change from like needing one to wanting one, and then
Yeah.
I realized that wasn't quite right in me, and that's when I go to the meeting or I do something different. That was the key change. I was like, but there's something not wrong here. I don't need a drink. I really don't want one, but something's telling me to escape. So instead of
Mhm.
trying to escape, I just did something else. I contacted someone, went to a meeting, whatever, and that was it. It's a long, long time ago since I even thought about it, you know. So it does work, and it's a neurons in the brain, man. Changing them takes a little bit of time, but when you do, you're like, okay, I'm thinking a different way, I'm feeling a different way, then you don't need to go back.
Yeah, and I think it does help though with time. Like I used to think, like, how can I ever be sober? How can I like go and do things sober? And then it's only when you start doing them and you think like it wasn't that bad, and the more time that passes, and then like I can remember being with my uncle who was a recovering alcoholic, saying like the worst thing for me would be to be sober, like to not be able to drink. And now this was like when I was still drinking at the time. And now I think one of the worst things would be to be like in a hungover, drunken state. And I couldn't think of anything worse than having the feelings that I used to have. And I'm so grateful
Yeah,
now that all them days are gone. Of like now being late on a Saturday night here for me, waking up in the morning, the worst I'm going to feel is maybe a bit tired.
yeah. No, it's a different world. It's a fucking different world. The one thing I felt in those years was that I couldn't escape. You know, I just I
Mhm.
couldn't escape, couldn't stop, and then you can, and that's it. And it's really possible. Amazing, beautiful man. We covered a lot there in your whole story. Appreciate your honesty, man. And I totally forgot about the years. That's impressive, man. It's almost 4 years now. Spot on. So now
Yeah,
you
and
can go to be the example.
it's really strange though that like I've always wanted to go to meetings, but because of my Spanish has improved a lot from when I was living in Barcelona, but like the meetings and things here that are in Spanish, I've never listened to someone's story in Spanish or shared in Spanish. So I don't know how harder that would be, but I've also
Yeah.
never wanted to go to a town. Have you gone to meetings in Spanish? But your
Um,
level's a lot better than
no,
mine.
my levels isn't that good. To be honest, no. I think I went to. Did I go to one? I can't remember. I don't think so. So no, because I was put off as well because I didn't think I'd feel that connection because I couldn't talk.
No, yeah, I feel that like stuff I'd get lost on me, and I wouldn't be able to be like as honest and share. I'd be using words that don't really represent or explain what I want to say. But I feel though that now that like after 4 years, when I was in New York, and there was a couple of lads in there that had only gone, I think one had gone a couple of days, one had gone a couple of weeks, asking me for advice. And it's strange now that people hear like a number like 3 years or 4 years when you've only gone 2 days. And I can remember how I felt when I was in like the first couple of days. And it's just, it's hard though, like you say, when people ask you for stuff and you don't have the answers and you don't know what to say, you can only sort of tell them what works for you, and
Yeah,
what works for me might not work for someone else as well. But it's trying to find what does work. And once you know what does work, then to focus on that.
yeah. Perfect. Perfect advice. Beautiful. Perfect way to finish it off. Really appreciate it, Mark. Who knows where we're gonna meet next? Maybe in fucking Mexico or something. You never.
Ideally, sooner rather than later is the most important
Yeah,
thing, I
man.
hope, Greg.
Yeah, man. Well, look, speak soon, but take it easy. Appreciate that a lot, mate. Take it easy.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Cheers.
Ciao, ciao.